I'm not talking directly about industrial buildings, but I'm trying to put them into the context of avant-garde architecture and their presentation in the print media. Already very, very early, photographers were interested in the building process, in industrial building, in construction. Starting, for example, around 1910-11, you see a picture of the photographer Alfred Stieglitz, titled New York, Old and New. You see the old brownstones, and you see one of the first high-rises in New York. Middle picture is the Rockefeller Center under construction, photo by Berenice Abbott. And on the right-hand side, you see a picture of Erich Mendelsohn, one of the best-known architects of the 1920s, out of his book, America, a picture book of an architect, which appeared in 1926. Here again, this Stieglitz, who according to me was one of the first, being interested in photographing the industrialization of the construction process, not the buildings themselves, because we saw a lot of photos, historic photos of industrial buildings. The way of portraying industrial architecture was only possible when the reflex camera was invented. Until then, you had the bellows camera or folding camera, which was very, very difficult to handle. And with a reflex camera, you had a lot of experimental possibilities, choosing, for example, the situation where you could photograph from. To give you a small idea of some architects photographing, some artists, you see Alexander Rodchenko, you see Hannes Meyer, the second Bauhaus director, you see a Berlin photographer called Otto Umberg, and you see Bauhaus students in 1930. Only until then it was possible to have lessons at the Bauhaus. Until 1930, there was only hobby photographing, and in 1930, a teacher was engaged called Peter Hans. Coming back to Erich Mendelsohn, and I already mentioned the title, America, Picture Book of an Architect. This was the first book he published with a lot of photos of especially grain silos. I will show them to you within some minutes. 3 years later, he tried to compare modern architecture, choosing examples of Russia, Europe, and the United States. The book of 1926 paved a way to a lot of books published by architects. For example, Walter Gropius, International Architecture, or Bruno Taut, Die Neue Baukunst. The book of Mendelsohn got important not only because Mendelsohn was taking with his reflex camera photos, but it became important with photos which he used from a Swedish architect who already in the early 1920s, together with Eliel Saarinen, emigrated to the United States. His name was Knut Lönnberg Holm, and he left a lot of photos to Mendelssohn. He, and I'm talking now about Knut Lönnberg Holm, he photographs the wild advertising scaffolds of the billboards, the neon signs at night, the parking lots around the high-rises, and above all, the building sites with their skeleton-like steel constructions, yet unclad. Mendelssohn comments in a kind of poetical prose, like a film script, I'm quoting Mendelssohn, the X-ray of the completed building, here I repeat the picture I already have been showing, the X-ray of the completed building, the horizontal elements count the floor levels, are ceiling girders, breast walls, and mirrors of future stone cladding. All the intestines, pipes for water, sanitation, light, air, and transport, for a long time hang from the steel construction before fit cut starts. And now I come to the central topic of my lecture, the influence of the industrial buildings on the architects of functionalism, or in German, Neues Bauen, or international style. Industrial photography was, except the Stieglitz photos of 1910, a quite new brand topic. And to underline the ideology of purification, I have another quotation of Mendelssohn. Out of naked functional form, abstract beauty arises. Mendelssohn writes under the photographs of grain silos shown by him. You have here two examples, a Chicago grain silo and a Buffalo grain silo. And still in the early 1990s, in 1992, Aldo Rossi calls them timeless cathedrals. It is possible to speak of a kind of silo or grain store mania. Here again, some of those examples which have been published in the books of Gropius, Mendelssohn, and Taut. Compared to other countries in Europe, Germany seems to have attained a head start in the field of artistical factory architecture, which probably was already to be seen in the lecture of Axel. But in America, huge industrial buildings emerged whose unknown majesty surpasses our German buildings of this species too. So far Gropius, and he contains the grain silos of Canada and South America, the coal silos of the great railway lines, and the modern factory halls of the North American industrial trusts, and their monumental force of impression can nearly stand up to the edifices of ancient Egypt. So this is a very high qualification Gropius is using here. The place of birth, and here again I can refer to Axel's lecture. He was talking about the Revue der Industriebau. He was talking about the publications of the German Werkbund, Werkbund founded in 1907, especially in the publication of 1913, The Art in Industry and Commerce. A lot of industrial buildings were shown. Axel as well mentioned the industrialist, cultural interested person Karl Ernst Osthaus. He was showing a portrait of him. Osthaus, who founded the Museum for Art, Trade and Industry. And within this museum, already in the early years of the 20th century, he organized exhibitions, and those exhibitions were to be seen in the United States as well. Therefore, I am here showing this example of 1912 exhibition in Minneapolis, but organized by the people around Osthaus and Gropius. And probably third person has to be mentioned, called Franz Stöttner. According to me, he was one of the first founders of a scientific archive for architecture. And he had a whole crew of photographers which he has been sending around the world and asking them to portray certain buildings. By being reproduced in the print media again and again and again, architecture or certain buildings become icons. One of the most famous icons, and we will have 100 years of the foundation of the Bauhaus next year in 2019. One of the most iconized buildings is the buildings of the Bauhaus in Dessau. You know, the Bauhaus was founded in Weimar. They had to move in 1925. They moved to Dessau. And Gropius was quite intelligent person of brand marking the Bauhaus. He already did this in 1923 in Weimar, and again in 1926 when the Bauhaus buildings were opened. And he asked Lucia Moholy-Nagy to produce a series of pictures, and those pictures then were repeatedly reproduced, and he was very clever to keep the copyright. But I want to say something about this lady. Probably you all know Laszlo Moholy-Nagy as an artist. I don't know, maybe. But she was the only trained photographer, and she was the one trying to introduce photography at the Bauhaus. I said that this only happened in 1930 with his teacher Peter Hans. She was Czech. Her name was Lucia Schulz, and she never, until the last years, probably the beginning of the 21st century, monographs were dedicated to her work. She always was the second person behind Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. Icon Bauhaus, icon Fagusswerke. Axel mentioned the Fagusswerk. Another icon, the Lingotto factories in Turin, designed by Mate Trucco. And here you see, you mentioned me with my arms in front of the window. You have Corbusier on the testing course, and you have painting of the futurist painter Carlo Carrà. So some icons. It's not necessary to say anything about this 1903 curtain wall factory. Axel already said everything. It's not only in books of famous architects as Corbusier, Gropius, Taut, and others that the modern architecture, and especially the architecture of, here the title, Bauten der Arbeit und des Verkehrs, buildings of work and traffic, that industrial buildings were reproduced. And I'm quoting the editor of this series of books, Müller-Wulkow. I'm attracted just by the buildings of work and transport because I'm of the opinion that the creative ingenuity here is primarily forced to make a break with the thoughtless conventions. So far, Müller-Wulkow. And exactly in this spirit, Le Corbusier is arguing. I'm citing Le Corbusier. Architecture has nothing to do with style, style that is nothing more than a feather on a woman's head. Primary forms are the most beautiful ones because they allow us to see clear. Architects today are not able to materialize simple shapes. Operating by means of calculation, engineers are using geometrical forms, pleasing our eyes by geometry and our spirit by mathematics. Their works are on the way to great art, and you already are acquainted with the Bunge y Born silos in Buenos Aires and the topic of manipulating architecture. That's what Le Corbusier did, and that's what Gropius did as well. The grain silo of Worms, which you see here beneath, repeatedly reproduced by Gropius, showing boxcars in the background, scaffolding and workers in the foreground. According to this, a book was written, one of the series of books which have been written and edited by the Bauhaus in Dessau. The author is a person called Werner Graef, and he is treating the new possibilities and techniques of photography, including photograms, including the new vistas, including the idea of making dynamic photos. Along with the photograms like those composed by Man Ray and those that were generated by the Bauhaus and its entourage, photography totally is emancipated from reality and becomes an independent artistic creation. A predecessor of total abstraction was the trend towards photography made dynamic. Dynamization and movement are symbols of progress. Mohl-Nótt, you see here in the middle, a small title of one of the books of Laszlo Mohl-Nótt, treating the topic of film and photography as well. Already in 1922, and this is this drawing here, already in 1922, Mohl-Nótt conceived with his kinetic constructive system a very progressive idea. Again and again, Mohl-Nótt refers to industrial constructions. He refers to especially the details of transmission or high-tension masts, transporter bridges, machine halls, and chimneys. They all count among the new motives of the avant-garde photographers and are used by architects to underline their ideology of purification. It's photos of Mohl-Nótt, it's photos It's photos of Hannes Meyer. And probably it's necessary to talk about this publication by Siegfried Giedion. Giedion and Van Esteren, for many, many years, since 1925 until the early 1950s, were the most important persons, secretary of the Congrès International d'Architecture Moderne, CIAM congresses. So photography and architecture as well was influenced by the book of Giedion, Building in Iron and Building in cast, what is concrete, Eisenbeton? Cast concrete, reinforced iron, sorry. Here, probably again, going back to history and not only talking about the 1920s, early 1930s, the fascination of constructive details here shown in a picture on the left-hand side, which is the, again, already mentioned Alte Maschine during the World Exhibition in Paris in 1889. Photo of Kertész, photo of Berenice Abbott, and a photo of Le Corbusier, published in his book Vers une Architecture of 1924. I was talking about the new technical ideas, photograms, and I was talking about, with the possibility of the reflex camera, of certain specific vistas the photographers used. One is the down top, and the other one is the top down. Here again you have photos of Abbott, of Mohl-Notch, from the Berlin Radio Tower, from the Eiffel Tower, again a Kertész photography, Transporter Bridge in Marseille, from high-rise in New York. I mentioned a certain mania for silos, and I think you can speak about a mania according to the photography of chimneys, and because we are here in Prague, I showed on the right-hand side a picture of Zudek, Josef Zudek, your famous photographer. On the right-hand side, a picture of Mohl-Notch, and another picture which has the subtitle Notch gave to those people who were infected by the chimney mania. Paul, do you know this book? I think it's really fantastic. Books on Paris normally were showing the glittering, fascinating city on the Seine. And this former pupil of Bauhaus, he was there in 1927, 1928. His name is Moshe Raviv, or when he was producing this book in 1931, he called himself Moy Fair. And according to what most people expect when they open a book, a photo book on Paris, was not to be found in his book. He was portraying the metropolitan city of velocity, the city of work and industry. Paris was a city, a industrial city, nobody knows. Normally people think Notre Dame, whatever, Sacré-Cœur, Montmartre. Into the iconic series of photographies, those pictures of Charles Sheeler, which is this one and this one, crisscross conveyors of the Ford factory in Dearborn in Detroit. They have been an inspiration for, again, the already mentioned Berenice Abbott with this Edison company photography. But what, according to me, and then I'm coming back to the citation of Gropius comparing industrial architecture with the buildings of ancient Egypt, this person, Charles Sheeler, painter and photographer, is comparing in one of his books his crisscross conveyors of 1927 with the buttresses of Chartres Cathedral. He was quite famous, and he was invited to, again, by the German Werkbund, organize exhibition in 1929, which was called Film and Photo. And there, again, it was possible to find a lot of photos of industrial buildings. And here I am again referring to the Bauhaus buildings and the Lingotto buildings. G was a review founded by Mies van der Rohe, Kiesler, and the already mentioned Werner Graef, who edited this book in 1929. There is coming the new photographer. Photography as art, says Stone. Stone as Otto Umberg, the one I already mentioned, Berlin photographer of the 1920s. Photography as art, says Stone, is a very dangerous ground, Benjamin notes. It is not difficult to take a photograph, but still it is very difficult to make a good photograph. Stone states in 1929. He gives proof of this, amongst other things, by his report, The Einstein Tower near Potsdam of 1928. Thanks to his photographs and those of others published in the print media, Mendelssohn's work, like the bulk of the architecture of Neues Bauen, becomes an icon. Within the framework of the so-called international style, inclusive industrial and technical buildings, avant-garde architecture and photography are amalgamated to a powerful medium. Thank you for your attention.